yeah, let's get your reaction to Man City's frustrating draw, goalless draw with already relegated Southampton last weekend. I think many of us expected City to win this one, but they were just unable to break down that packed Southampton defence that have I think they've shipped 82 goals in the Premier League this season. But City sort of served up a pretty dismal attacking display, let's say. I think the overriding emotions from that game, from City's perspective, were frustration and disappointment to not get the win. So, what have you
Yeah.
made of the results, Stephen, and the performance? What are the main things you've taken away from that?
Yeah, I was really disappointed to be honest. We've had a good few weeks, winning lots of games. Not always convincing, but we definitely turned a corner, so to speak. And we found, if not Champions League or Premier League winning form, we've definitely found, Champions League qualification kind of form. One of the best teams in the country. And this felt sort of like a slight step back. And I got to be careful about choosing strong words, but I definitely felt City underestimated them a little bit. That's my overriding feeling, and it was sort of backed up by the post-match comments as well from Guardiola and Ruben Diaz in particular, where Guardiola said they didn't expect Southampton to play like this, and Ruben Diaz sort of moaned, if I'm being honest, moaned about how they played and set up, and it came across as a little bit entitled, and everyone can do that. I'm not going to slag off the players. Who hasn't moaned about things like this? And we all do it privately, and it's only a very human thing to do. But I would guess frustration is usually because they weren't expecting something, and I think they were sort of taken back by Southampton's approach, and I think they probably thought it'd be easy. They might have been looking at goal difference like I was, and thinking, who knows, who knows, who knows. And I think that's the trap that anyone can fall into. And to me, it probably explained the lack of urgency. It was like, oh, well, even I was saying, I'm sure you're probably thinking the same. Oh, we'll score in the second half. We'll probably win this. It'll be okay. Didn't happen because City didn't have enough urgency. Not they didn't want it, but they didn't force it, and everyone wants to win. Everyone wants to be successful. But the people who are successful usually go and make it happen. And there wasn't enough of that for Manchester City on the day. So as much as it can be very difficult to play against, 11 defenders essentially, including the keeper, you just you play for Manchester City Football Club, so this isn't new information. This happens all the time anyway. And there was always a real possibility of them doing that, given the fact that they know if they came to City and attacked us, not came to, we came to them, it could be 7-0, with Haaland returning and whatever. It could easily have been an absolute battering. And they're trying to play for pride and become not the worst ever team in Premier League history, which they achieved against Manchester City. And when you look at their goal record, I think they've had two clean sheets in 47 games. That was the 23rd game. It was the 23rd game before they had a clean sheet, So they had 22 games in a row without clean sheet. So their defensive record was abysmal. And I think, to be honest, City have only got themselves to blame for that draw that felt like a defeat. And as a result now, your Champions League qualification, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, is up in the air still. And we've got two difficult fixtures. Like Bournemouth and Fulham are good sides. I know varying levels of what to play for, but they're very good sides, and that could easily go pear-shaped if City have a performance like they did there. Because let's be honest, Fulham and Bournemouth are better sides than Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace, sorry, we'll get onto that in a bit. Southampton, and City struggled there, so they've just shown a blueprint of what to do. And yeah, it was a poor performance. Slightly better in the second half with the changes, but overall, City were slow to react to everything. We moved the ball too slowly. I think they felt it would come without they expected it to come, I would argue, but it wasn't enough, and ultimately we dropped 2 points, and it could be a very crucial 2 points.
Yeah, from very frustrating. Sort of City seem content to play at walking pace. They look just devoid of ideas, and I feel. Do you feel a little bit sorry as well for someone like Haaland, who it's his first start since coming back from injury? It's one of those games again where he's just starved of service. Obviously
100%.
the top scorer, he's done really well, but there are games where he's just not been given that service. He's one of those strikers that thrives on those balls played in behind and the crosses into the box. That's what he wants. But do you think you feel a little bit sorry for him that he's not getting that service on a regular basis?
100%. He's the most one of those lethal finishes in world football, but every gun needs ammo, and he's not been given that. Absolutely. I mean, I was as a slight aside, I was watching a compilation of Morgan Gibbs White, earlier because we've been linked to him, and that cross he gave to Chris Wood, in that game 2-2 the other day, and it only against Leicester, but yeah, you just don't see that from City players. Kevin De Bruyne did it an awful lot, doesn't do it as much anymore, but where are the early passes? And as much as teams sit deep, not every team sits deep against City that deep, and there are times where you can play. And it happened towards the end where De Bruyne picked Haaland out in the channel, and he cut inside and nearly fed it to Nico Riley for a goal. but we just don't do it. And like ultimately, if you've got a 6'5" guy who can finish with either feet acrobatically, brilliantly, just put a cross in the 6 yard area, head height for a 6'5" fella, and he'll try and get his head on it. The amount of times the crosses went nowhere near him, and look, I know Haaland could do more and get more involved, but ultimately, he's an insane tool, an incredible asset, a freakish, one of a kind footballer, and all you got to do is just try and get the ball to him. And all these passes around the area are very Manchester City, but they're not. They're great, but someone at some point has to go, right, I'll put the cross in, or I'll beat the man, or I'll try and draw some players towards me, and I'll try and find Erling. And it felt like to me everyone else was waiting for someone else to do it. McAtee would pass to Foden, Foden would pass it back to Kovacic, who'd work it out wide to Vardiol, back to De Bruyne, and back in again. Eventually someone would make a cross, but it was at this point, it was so set. And that's the main issue, it's the speed at which you do it. Like you can cross, but when you cross in and there's only really Haaland and one or two players in the area, and they've got 11 people back, it's you have to move it quicker. And Haaland is absolutely starved for service. And I know people will turn around and go, "Oh, but I City better without him," and so on. That's not the case. City will have trouble with Erling Haaland. They're better when they're more proactive, and I think Haaland is suffering for City's hesitance really. And yeah, it's just not good enough.
And for this game, Guardiola made 5 changes. Of course, Haaland was one of those brought in, but he decided to go without natural wingers, and we surprised that the Guardiolas didn't really stick with what was a winning formula. The City, I think, won the last 4 Premier League games coming into this one. So the likes of Doku and Moose, who came off the bench in the end, they arguably offered more during their cameo appearances off the bench than what some of the other players did from the start.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's the old adage: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I'm not going to teach Guardiola that's okay because he's the best manager in the world. But Guardiola traditionally is very much he's a man of consistency usually, especially towards the end of the season when the team's found a bit of form. He doesn't make many changes. He tends to stick with what he knows, and occasionally Guardiola can slightly overthink. And you could argue, Southampton, the idea behind it was technical players, Rico Lewis, James McAtee, Phil Foden, tight spaces players, to quote Guardiola, the ones where they can pick the ball up and do the little 1-2s. But it felt like too many changes. We were obviously going to have all the ball. We were obviously going to be camped in their half. And that instance, I'm thinking, well, why not use the goal threat and the 6'4" capabilities of Nico O'Reilly, who can get forward really well? Why not use the attacking pace? And he can cross the ball, Mateus Nunes. And I've been a bit of a critic of Mateus Nunes, but look, he was again lightning quick and definitely he's got a forward instinct with his assists and goals this season, Nunes, compared to Rico Lewis, who I really like. But you put Oscar Vardiol, back on the left, and we had a Kanji and Diaz back there. But Kanji, another change. If you're gonna have all the ball camped outside the area, I think I'd rather have Oscar Vardiol there than a Kanji or Diaz. Someone who's more of a creative centre back. Who can actually offer something going forward. And then you think of the other changes. Look, Phil Foden coming back and he's Premier League Player of the Year. I understand there's never an argument for Phil Foden not to start. It makes a lot of sense. But then you put Haaland in and McAtee and a Kanji and put Vardiol back left back. There's a lot of changes essentially, and to me, these can always be justified if you win or so on, and if the performance is there. But it looks like what it ended up being, a little bit disjointed and a change to how City have been playing recently. Vardiol and Rico Lewis were pushed wide, but they're not the same as Nico O'Reilly and Nunes, what they do. And they're both good crosses, those two, for what it's worth as well. And Nico, we know, has got a goal threat. And look, as soon as he's on the pitch, he nearly got. I know he's playing in the centre then, but we saw his movement and his burst to score goals. Yeah, it did feel like we made a few changes, and I was surprised because it was sort of working, if I'm being honest. And yeah, like, I don't know, I didn't feel like it was necessary. And it felt like to me there were not defensive changes, but they were a little slightly more cautious and controlling when I don't really understand why we did that against Southampton of all sides. They are literally at that point statistically the worst side in Premier League history, and they were always going to just sit there and try and be defensive. And I felt at that point, just play your attackers. When Marmoush, Nico O'Reilly, Savino, Doku came on, it felt different. There were people willing to take risks, people willing to run at people. Marmoush in particular, full of hunger and energy, and Doku. Look, I was reading the stats from Doku. He was so impressive. More successful dribbles, 5, and chances created, 3, and duels won 8. The McAtee, Foden, and Lewis combined, and Phil Foden, combined. So that's just aggression and being assertive, and. I don't understand really the logic about removing that right now because we have to win, we have to score goals, and we have to scare Southampton, and we didn't, unfortunately.
Yeah, and in terms of the race for the top five now, how detrimental do you think that draw was for City? Does it really change anything in terms of Guardiola's thinking heading into these final two games against Bournemouth and Fulham?
Um, I mean, we can't deny the impact potentially of playing on Tuesday as well after that. Look, this is a cup final, so you play whatever you deem the strongest side, whatever you do. You don't rotate or whatever. You just play the side that you want to win. And we've got a whole week leading up to it. And let's be honest as well, I know it's only 3 days later, but it's the penultimate game of the season. Like everyone should be able to handle that. And then you've got 5 days until Fulham on the Sunday. So, yeah, I mean, obviously you think about it, but anyone who's serious wants to play in the FA Cup, and they also want to play in your last home game of the season, especially for De Bruyne's send off. So I don't think there should be any notable changes for those games. You should just play the players you want to play and go. You've got two more games after that. Suck it up and play. So I think there'll be an element of that where Guardiola will just tell them to get on with it a little bit. And I think they will do as well. So yeah, I look, he'll play the team that's going to work against Palace, not the team that's most fresh or anything like that, because I don't think there'll be any notable tiredness at this stage of the season.